Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Dom's Rocco Street Chef deck. This deck has elements of +1/+1 counters, food tokens, casting from exile. It's one of those that's really tightly built around a commander and tries to take advantage of everything that commander can do. And I think it generally does a very, very good job at it. But Dom's looking for a little bit of help. They are looking for us to work on the consistency of the deck, to get better starting hands, and a more focused game plan. And their restrictions are only budget requirements is no cards over $100, and they want to keep certain cards like Indomitable Creativity, got it first try, and call forth the Tempest. Absolutely, we can definitely do that. And if you want to see deck lists like this early, like a week early from the video coming up, and you want to work on them yourself or give some suggestions, you can join us on our Discord through the Patreon, where you can join as little as $1 a month. Now that's all to say, this episode is going to be a little interesting. I'm actually going to do a little backwards, where I'm going to give my additions first, and then after the fact I'm going to say what we can take out, because honestly this deck is really, really strong, but there's a lot of cards I want to basically put in here, and there's a lot of cards I want to take out. And I want to show a bit of how I do that and what kind of mentality we want to have when taking cards out, because I agree, the deck is doing a lot, and some things are good and some things need work. But we'll get into that in a second. First, let's take a look at our commander and see what they do for our deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Rocco Street Chef, and why are they our Naya commander? Well, Rocco is Naya red, green, white, 3 mana for a 2/4 elf druid. And they have 2 abilities. The first one is the beginning of your end step, each player exiles a top card of their library. Until your next end step, each player may play the card they exiled this way. Only their own cards, no one else's. And the second ability is whenever a player plays a land from exile, or casts a spell from exile, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and create a food token. Now, this is a card I really like. This is kind of a theme. It's like it's very much so like Brina, like Miss Bumbleflower, where it's pseudo-political but brings in a lot of card advantage in terms of making your creature stronger, creating tokens, and that kind of stuff can trigger other cards to propel you into the late game really quickly, while impulse drawing you and all your opponents. And I like that. I think it's a very, very efficient creature, and I think it does something really, really cool. But because of that, and because of all the things Rocco does, there's just a lot of variety on how you can build Rocco. And we can see here Dom's build is very much so kind of dabbling in everything. We've got really good impulse draw cards to take advantage of that triggered ability. We have a bunch of artifact matters cards that basically give us advantages for the food tokens coming in. And then we have a bunch of +1/+1 counters cards that matter. Now, like I said, I'm going to go straight into my additions. And most of them are going to be on one theme that I think is lacking the most or could be the most upgraded. And then we're going to come back here in a moment and we're going to look at how we're going to do cuts. So the first little part of additions I want to talk about is these 1 mana dorks. Now, these are kind of, I'm not saying any number, I just want to bring them up here. We're at a very high power level of a deck, and with a 3 mana commander, we really do benefit from more of these 1 mana cards. Now, I would say we've got Birds of Paradise and Delighted Halfling. After this, because of the colors we're in, I would very much so consider, though it's not here, Arbor Elf, because it can untap multiple colors, or even then, either just one of our elves that tap for 1 green, or Avacyn's Pilgrim that taps for a white. And the reason I want this is, as I said before, getting your commander out on turn 2 is really, really powerful, but with our mana curve, which is something we will come back to, we really have a lot in the 3 mana slot, and the faster we can start doing things, the better we'll be. And in addition, the more cards we can impulse cast, the more triggers we're going to get. So with that in mind, just having some low mana, mana advantage cards, some mana dorks is going to make a big difference. Coming into the rest of the cards that I really want to give into this deck, I want to add into this deck, are a lot of +1/+1 counter themes. Now, a lot of this is going to come from my feelings of like my experience playing Brina and this Bumbleflower, and I'll try to explain them the best I can, but this is also one of those, like, you really got to figure out how many of these you want to play. I'm an advocate for all of them, but they're not like breaking the deck. The deck itself is really, really strong. These are all kind of tangential or side upgrades that I still think are very much so worth putting in. Enough preamble, let's get into it. Basking Brood Scale is a card that I think goes kind of underused in a lot of +1/+1 counter decks, and the main thing I really like about it is that it turns any +1/+1 counter trigger and any proliferate trigger into an Eldrazi spawn. Now the deck itself already has some cards that work with tokens that I really like, but even without those, I really like the translation of putting +1/+1 counters, something we consider to be very easy to do, into creating Eldrazi spawn, which are colorless mana, something we might consider a little harder to do, right? Now, I wouldn't consider these on the level of treasure tokens. They're very similar, right? They can block, you can put counters on them and they can attack. They can add the non-colored pips into a card. It is really powerful to be getting them, and then once you get them going, with proliferation, it becomes really, really cheap to generate more and more. Now, there might be better builds for this, especially in colorless or artifact style builds, but the floor of this card is really, really good. You can just occasionally put a counter on it and start attacking with a 3/3, a 4/4, a 5/5 without over committing to it, right? Because as you put the counters, the real benefit you're getting are the Eldrazi spawns. So that's something I really like and I think can fit in very nicely. Another one that comes to +1/+1 counter synergy, we have the Abzan Falconer. I'm generally less down for that. That's the card that gives creatures with +1/+1 flying. I prefer Duskshell Crawler. Now that's generally because I do like efficiency when it comes to our cards. I like staying lower mana. We're very high on 3 mana, but I also tend to consider Trample to be extremely similar to flying when you have enough +1/+1 counters. There's a certain point where your creatures are so large that the incidental damage that you are losing by them blocking is made up for the fact they're losing creatures to block you, right? So I think it evens out, and when your creatures are like 6/6, 7/7, 8/8, and beyond, that trample is just basically unblockable at a certain point, and I really do like that. I also like this comes in as a 0/3. You can make it into a 1/4, which is not a bad blocker and an early attacker, and then after which you can start kind of using that trample with all of your other creatures. I will say this is probably the weakest of the cards I'm going to say, but it's still worth mentioning. Kutzil is one I think really bears considering in a deck like this. This is just 2 lines of text that are just extraordinarily good. I really do like that first one that says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. It's a pseudo silence, very, very strong. And as soon as Kutzil, resolves, it's on. You don't need anything else to make it work. It's just active. And of course, that second ability, whenever one or more creatures that are stronger than base power deal combat damage to a player, draw a card, that basically counts per player. So you can attack all your opponents and draw 3 cards. Very, very powerful, a great creature, and generally a nice defense mechanism to deal with your opponents on your own turn. We don't have counter magic, so having a little bit of protection is nice. After that, another card in the 3 slot, something I really do like, one of 2 toxic cards I'm going to talk about. This is Bloated Contaminator. If you play with this card, you really know the power. I don't really need to go too much into it. It is a card with a lot of good text on it, and then when it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. And that's very, very good. There's another card that I forgot to add here. It's the green Dethrone creature from New Capenna Commander. That one's really, really good. It has similar text on damage, proliferate, but here I think they're even. Proliferation can be really, really good in any small like +1/+1 counter synergy. Let me quantify that. In decks that are all in on +1/+1 counters, proliferate kind of gets worse because at a certain point it's just easier to have more like triggers that put +1/+1 counters than it is to add more proliferate. But in decks that kind of sprinkle +1/+1 counters here and there, like this Rocco deck, where that first +1/+1 counter is very valuable on creatures, Proliferate gets way better. I've said it before, but Proliferate is valued on how difficult it is to add counters and the type of counters to add. And if you have a deck that is good at putting a few counters but not a million, Proliferate gets really good. It gets really bad when you can really easily put like a million counters out. So I think this is a really good fit here. And then of course the other toxic card, one that I'm very fond of, is Contaminant Grafter. I didn't talk about Toxic before, I'll talk about it here. Toxic, I recognize it is kind of a contentious ability, and you can to a certain point ignore it a lot of the time on the previous one, the Bloated Contaminator. But Contaminant Grafter kind of does a lot more. Once again, it has this text that where whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to one or more players, proliferate. Now, of course, this one does not. This one doesn't do more than one per damage. Have I been using this wrong? Immediately my gut strikes. I'm like, have I hit 2 players with this and proliferated twice? Maybe. I should maybe look back on some footage to find out. But still, that ability to just get an additional proliferation on combat damage, the thing you want to do, is really good. The fact that it's a 5/5 trample and putting counters on it makes it really great. But the second you can start getting corrupted off, which gets you an end step, a draw card, and a land card on the battlefield, you're doing really well. I would probably argue that if you can go through 3 combat steps that are needed, or several combat steps to get that corrupted going, you're probably winning in a very like direct way. But I still think it's really powerful. Maybe I'm a little less sold on this, but I still think it's a great card that's worth playing. And then of course, Lightning Bolt, it's missing from the deck, blah blah. Okay, we're done additions. Let's talk about subtractions. Now, why am I so keen on talking about subtractions here? Well, there's a few things that I look at whenever I look at a new deck that kind of, to me, hint the kind of work we need. Obviously, the first thing I do is hear what the deck builder is asking. And consistency is usually a key word that says, I am not getting enough card draw, or I am not getting enough land drops. And then the following term that says better starting hand makes me think even further into the latter category, where we're having mana problems. It's partially why I wanted to put in Mana Dorks. And the second we look over at the land count, I think it all kind of comes together. We are playing 32 lands with 3 MDFCs. Now, generally what I like to say, because I've seen decks that are like 35 and 3 MDFCs, or 34 and 3 MDFCs, is that once we get into 3 MDFCs, I generally would rather go down to 2 and an extra land, because I think the MDFCs are carrying too much weight at that point. But that's not even the case here. We can easily see that one of our MDFCs is a tap land, so I'm already just discounting it there. I'm thinking of this as 32 and 34 with MDFCs, because I really do think the MDFCs that are tapped are way worse. But we are not at 35, 34 lands. We are at 32 lands, which is really low for a deck that has playable cards up to 7 mana. Not all of these, not this one, but the first 2 are at 7 mana. We have an 8 mana card, Call Forth the Tempest, that we are very keen on keeping. Now we have nothing in 6, and we've got a bunch in 5. So we are not as bad as it could be, but you know, we've got the point where these cards can't really easily be played on curve anymore, with our 7 drops being less than 20% chance to play on curve. So, especially with the idea of Rocco also benefiting the amount of lands we're playing, I want to bring us up to at least 36 lands. That's 4 additional slots that I immediately want to put in, right? So we've got this situation that I want to put in a bunch of cards, and we need to make some cuts. So how do we make cuts in a deck like this? Now, for a lot of people, it's kind of easy to look at the cards that are off theme, or the cards that are very easily replaced or over-represented, let's say, where you have like 6 different, let's say, lightning bolt effects, cut the worst ones. But here with Rocco, I understand what the difficulty is, right? Rocco does a lot of stuff, and in order to kind of make up for this, we're playing basically 3 separate strategies, and in addition, cards that work as glue, such as like Smothering Tithe, right, Rhythm of the Wild, these kind of effects that are just good in our colors to kind of balance it all out. We've got a lot of balls in the air, and it's really hard to make the deck function. So how do we cut? How do we make our cuts? And what I'm going to say generally is, the way I like to cut out of this is I'm looking for the cards that just do the least, even when they're good. So what do I mean by that? So let's take a look through here. Looking through here, we can see one of the first ones I'm looking at is Bloom Tender. Now, I'm not saying Bloom Tender because we're cutting it. I just want to use this as our first example. Bloom Tender is a card that when it is good is representing 3 mana every turn. And when it is okay, it taps for green. We have to do the floor and ceiling test, right? If you haven't watched my video on analysis of card power level, like how to analyze cards and see how strong they are, I really do recommend it. I think it's a very good video. But in essence, we can see the floor, we can see the ceiling, and that's how we measure a card. Here it's a little more complicated because, like I said, we're going to measure the ceiling. This is a powerful deck, and tapping for 3 different colors on this card with your commander out, pretty good. I have no problems here. But if we start going down just a few already, now I'm starting to get a different situation, right? Runaway Steam King. Whenever you cast a red spell, if this creature has fewer than 3 +1/+1 counters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Then you can remove 3 +1/+1 counters from this creature to add red, red, red. This card can be used in certain infinite combos. They are clunky infinite combos, but they are combos nonetheless. And this deck, as far as I can tell, and I've looked over it, has no means of actually triggering those infinite combos. So this is a value card. We are playing this a la, is it Bergie, the storyteller, that whenever you cast a spell, you basically get a red mana. We're using it like a fair version of that, in an even worse way. So this card, at its ceiling, is being used to cast red spell after red spell, and then every 3rd red spell, you get 3 red mana. The other ceiling, I guess, is that you just manually put +1/+1 counters on this and then remove them for 3 red mana. That's not good. Both of those things aren't very good in this deck. So even at a ceiling, this card isn't good. To me, very, very easy cut. Now, we're not going to go through all of them to that detail, but it's really important to look at it this way. So, Absent Falconer, I've offered something a little better. I don't mind if you keep it. It's up to you. It's a fine card. Going a bit lower, the next one I'm looking at was Faldorn. This is just getting kind of close to me. I appreciate what this card does. I think it's a little clunky. I don't think your opponents care about the 2/2 green wolves. I don't think you're really going to have tons and tons of mana to use the ability, go down a card, to trade for a card off the top of your deck, which you might not be able to cast because this is really tight on mana. I think it's just too okay. Like, it's just not good enough and relies too much on the rest of your deck working. And even when the rest of your deck is working, I think this is just fine. Like, if you have this out, right, and you're saying, like, we got Rhythm of the Wild out, so all of a sudden those wolves are coming in with haste, awesome. Then you're going to be playing, like, 2 to 3 of these cards, let's say, in a row. Bam, they're coming out, and you got a bunch of wolves with haste. That's just fine. I don't think anyone particularly cares about that, and if they do, you are probably winning anyways. And if you are using those tokens for something else, such as like Balin a Haymaker, or other of the ones that like Jaheira, so you tap for green, I feel like you could have just done something else. I feel like you didn't really need Faldorn to make that happen. There's a bunch of cards that do that better. So with that in mind, Faldorn is a card I'd like to cut. Moving down, Kami of the Whispered Hopes. Once again, a card that I think is just probably outclassed by lower mana versions of this, right? I think Gyre Sage would be a really good comparison, or that other 2 mana card with Evolve that says if this is a +1/+1 counter, it taps for 3 of any color. Both of those I think are just more reliable. Kami of Whispered Hope really often comes out as a very clunky mana dork. You know, sometimes it can get extra hardened scale style triggers and then eats removal or never reaches a really high number to be, I don't know, concerning to anyone. And so with that, I've just never been impressed by this card. And at 3 mana in a deck where 3 mana is the highest slot, I think you can get rid of it pretty easily. Going down a little further, it is very much so kind of the 4 drops I did want to talk about. So this is a good place as any to start getting into them. So, Valiant Fleet Swordjack feels really specific. Like, we just don't have the means to be giving people food, right? Like, this seems like it belongs in a different deck. We're the one making food. Like, am I wrong? Like, yeah. Whenever a player, you put a counter and you create a food token. There's a lot of ways to give your opponents a bunch of artifacts to take advantage of this, and it is a strategy I really like. But it's not this deck, right? So this just turns out to be an overcosted card that you sometimes encore. Like, I really do think this is just not supposed to be in here, that it feels so clunky. So I think very easy cut. There's just better decks to play this in, don't play this. Likewise, Jetmir feels like a very strange payoff that doesn't directly work with anything else in the deck, right? Or, sorry, let me rephrase. It doesn't work directly with our commander, because this is based on creature tokens, and our commander does not create creature tokens. Don't get me wrong, it works with a bunch of other, like your commander in tandem with other cards to create the creature tokens, but then why do you need Jetmir, right? Your commander grows creatures, and if they're generating tokens, you can grow them manually. Yeah, it's clunky, but you can do it. Whereas this really needs you, like, this doesn't do anything until you have 3 creatures, which isn't bad, but at 6 creatures, that's a lot of work, and at 9 creatures, that's, I don't know. I don't think that's worth it. This is hoping that a lot align for you to get a pretty bad payoff that is, I don't know, just cast Overrun. I genuinely think you will have a better time most of the time. This is too much effort for too little of an effect. Going into, still on 4 mana, Rampage of the Clans is another card that I almost immediately want to cut. This feels really clunky. I understand that it's like we're going to change our food tokens into centaurs, but like, is that really what we want to be doing here? Like, we have really good artifacts and enchantments, some that are so good that I really do not want to trade them into centaurs. You could say, well, Smothering Tithe into this card with a bunch of treasures creates this giant army of 3/3s that can take out all your opponents. But I'm tempted to say that's extremely win more, right? If you have Smothering Tithe out and you have created, what, 7 or 8, which is what I would think is necessary for this to be worthwhile, treasure tokens, like, you're winning the game, right? Like, what do you need this for? Just continue to cast cards in your deck that, you know, impulse draws all the time. Like, why do you need this to work? And once again, if you got like 50 food tokens, you should be winning the game. Is this really the card you need to win the game? I'm just a little suspicious, because there's just going to be situations, I think, that are pretty reasonable where you cast this and your opponents look down and go, yeah, that's cool with me. They had like 12 treasure tokens, or in a game I played this morning, actually, like, I was going to say 8 or 9 Cybermen. Like, they would love to turn those 2/2s into 3/3s. Like, absolutely, that's a great deal. Like, I just think this is just a liability half the time, and the other half, when it's not, you are already winning. So very easy cut. Thousand Mood Smithy, I think this is fine. Once again, this feels like a very strange payoff for this deck. Don't get me wrong, it's quite a payoff. It's a very strong one, but it is a card that just comes in, creates a construct token, and then you have to either immediately or wait a turn or more, flip this into a land to get, I don't know, like just another one each turn of the construct tokens. Like I'm just having a really hard time seeing this as being particularly good. I feel like you need, once again, a lot going for you for this to be strong. Like, going back to what Dom said, if my opening hand had this, I think the opening hand is a little weaker for it, right? This is a card that, sure, I can play on curve, but why am I doing that? Because it's not going to do anything unless I have an army or a bunch of food tokens. So more likely than not, I'm just going to kind of leave this around, because why would I cast it and bring, set up removal when I could just hold it to the point that I'm going to cast and activate it immediately, and therefore it just rots in my hand for most of the game. I'm just not very impressed. I think it's very, very clunky. I think it's like really interesting to me that almost all the 4-drops here I really, really dislike. Almost. I do see Smothering Tide there, of course. Annie joins up. It's really interesting. I think I will keep this one. It's just really hard to get the extra triggers out of your commander, and I think this works both because both of their abilities are triggers. So I think this is uniquely very, very strong, and so I like this. I will keep it. I'm not very, very keen. I've used very a lot in the last 30 seconds. I'm not usually keen on doubling effects, but I think this uniquely is almost like a 4 times effect by itself with their commander, and we are running a lot of legendary creatures, so I think it's particularly strong. No problem there. A Knight of Sweet's Revenge, I think it's strong. I think this is great, works really well. Parallel Lives, I feel like I just prefer Annie joins up, and if just on the same idea as always, I like the first doubler way more than the second doubler, but considering this is like a very expensive card that's already in the deck, I wouldn't hate you if you kept it in. It is my taste that I don't like doubling doublers, but you do what you like. Showdown of the Scalds is probably just a little too weak here. It's just a little too slow, where you're paying a lot to get a lot of cards, and you're going to have to wait a little bit for it. Whereas if I just feel like the 3 mana cards do this ability better, and then if I'm going to 5 mana, I'd want to do, I believe it's Escape from the Wild. I'll have to look it up. I just prefer that a little more. I don't remember what it's called then. Oh well. It is the 5 mana green-red card that says you may exile 5 cards. Yeah, I'm gonna still look for it. Nope, can't find it. Is it because it uses the word? There it is, Escape to the Wild, excuse me. I just feel like I'd rather play Escape to the Wilds for 1 more mana. So it's basically the same thing. You see an extra card, and you get an additional land that you can play off of it right away, which works really, really well with how our commander works. It is weird sometimes to be like, there's a more efficient version of this card, and it's an additional mana. It does happen, and this is one of those cases, but I still think it is something to consider. It would take a little stress off of 4s, and I like that a little more. Smothering Tide obviously is very, very good. Let's go near the end and a bunch of the higher mana cards. Quintorius Con, I think, is fine. It has a lot of really cool things going for it, but it feels a little clunky, just because I do like these cards that have what I'm going to call the Goblin. It's not Sharpshooter, maybe it's Sharpshooter. One of those effects where, like, on cast you do a bunch of damage. I really like them. I just don't like them when they're at like 5 mana, because it makes it really hard to get the next spell through that enables you to start taking advantage of that. That being said, if you can play Quintorius, you create the 3/2 to block for it, and you get through the turn cycle and keep them out, you're going to have a really explosive next turn, and I do like that. I like that the Discover 4 immediately triggers both this and your commander. So I think I am convinced in it. I think you need to really play in a specific way to get it to go, and I think this is something that's very I keep saying in this deck assist video is that you have cards that need a lot to go your way for them to hit their ceiling, and I would try to pay attention to that. I think that's very, very notable. Moving down here, Aerial Extortionist, very, very good, extremely good, a card I really, really do like. Dragonhawk, very, very strong by itself, and therefore I think it's fine. It's already really, really strong. I don't have a problem with it. Urabrask, I would say this is like one of the few places that Urabrask Heretic Predator is actually really, really good, and so I don't want to say take this out, but I would probably cut one of these or to two of these four. They're all really good, but we're kind of high on 4-mana cards. And just remember, and this is probably I'll say this again in the sevens, but we're playing a deck where we really want to cast cards from exile, and we have a bunch of cards that we just cannot cast from exile for most of the game, and we just hurt for it, right? The thing with impulsive draw is that we get to not put it in our hand, so it's cheaper than drawing most of the time. But the trade-off with high mana cards is that they can stay in your hand. This sounds, sometimes I say stuff that just sounds ridiculous. It's true, but just in my mind, I'm like, this is such an obvious thing, but cards in hand are better than cards you can cast for one turn, unless the deck is extremely low mana, then you actually prefer repeatedly impulsively drawing off the top of your deck because you just dig so far. Here, though, we have a bunch of cards that for the majority of the game, you're not going to be able to cast, and even later in the game, if you're going to want to double cast, they really get in the way. So I do, one way or another, want to cut these down to 2 of 5, if possible. I leave it up to you. I think my heart says Aerial Extortionist and Urabrask are really, really fun together, but probably the answer is keeping the Extortionist and Dragonhawk, because that's much stronger. Finally, Waltz of Rage. I think this is just overcosted for what it does. Don't get me wrong, cool, but still overcosted. I think like Blasphemous Act does 1/2 better, and then a bunch of the other exile effects do the other half better. Don't get me wrong, this impulsively draws a lot of cards, but you need a lot of things to happen for this to work out, and so your opponents are incentivized to interfere with you when you're doing things that benefit you more than them. Once again, saying things that seem obvious, but board clears traditionally are very hard to interact with. Pseudo fight spells, very easy to interact with. If any of your opponents have one removal spell, they can make this fizzle immediately, right? Because there's only one target, and it's targeting your creature. So just one Swords to Plowshare, one like Doomblade, whatever, and it's gone. You've burned 5 mana. And not only have they protected themselves from a board clear, they've also stopped you from like impulsively drawing half your deck. So they're very much so incentivized to interfere, and which means to me this doesn't resolve often unless like your opponent's all tapped out, which I mean, get it, girl. Like when the moon, the stars have aligned, like just do it. Looking at 7 mana, honestly, I just want to cut both of these. I'm just not particularly impressed in a deck that just has mana problems already. Everything I said about the 5 mana spells just counts even more. Atali's a cool card. Cut Atali. Flaming Tyrannosaurus is really, really rad, don't get me wrong, but it's the same problem. This one's even worse though, because at least Atali has an ETB. The T-Rex requires you to cast something for it to do anything, and the odds of it eating an exile effect are pretty high nowadays, and even if they don't, I mean, this is just what, like casting Gary, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, but worse if they remove it, because it's 2 extra mana, doesn't gain you life, can't scale really well. I don't know, really not impressed with this card. Really cool looking card. Very, very weird. Maybe in a dinosaur deck. Definitely not here. Okay, I think that's it. Notable thing, Call Forth the Tempest. I'm not allowed to remove it, but I am going to look at the camera for a few seconds, and that's all you need to know. Honestly, I think this deck is super sick. Everything I haven't touched on, I'm really impressed with. I'm pretty sure there's a few more things I could nitpick. Some cards like Rhythm of the Wild may not be doing as much as I'd like them to do. Other cards like Feasting Hobbit, I would really need to see in action because I think this is either very good or extremely clunky. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm leaning towards clunky. But what do I know? I haven't gotten to sit down and play this deck. I will say, this is the kind of deck that has a lot of check marks for me. So if you do edit this deck based on what I've said or get more specific questions for me, I'd love to see this again. This is such a cool deck. And yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say. I hope this was helpful, Dom. Thank you so much for sending this deck. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.